Welcome, everyone. Very glad to see at least a few of you here, even though it's such a busy time. Just wanted to, first of all, remember to thank Christine. Over the past year, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with her. She has been really instrumental spearheading this entire effort with Hanover, which we hope is going to be really important to social science research on our campus. And, throughout, Christine has been on the ball with every little aspect of it, right from, remember when you organized that whole grants workshop, and then, calling the proposals in for last year's grantees, making spreadsheets, sharing the information with Scott, reminding me about deadlines. And anyway, based on all of that hard work, Scott has decided that we will renew the partnership again with Hanover, or rather the contract with Hanover for another year. So that's a really good thing. And the goals of the partnership are basically to support and amplify CAHSS proposals from the social sciences, particularly, but even collaborative proposals between social science faculty and other faculty in our college, or even in other departments, other colleges in our university, and even off campus. But there has to be one PI who is a UMBC faculty and hopefully in the social sciences. We are looking for very large collaborative proposals, is the idea. Just want to tell you that the session for today is that we're going to tell you about the partnership, what Hanover and the resources that they provide for PIs. Christine is going to talk about that. And then we're going to be turning it over to 3 PIs who got tickets. And Christine will talk about that if you don't know what those tickets are. And they will talk about their experience with Hanover. So I just also want to thank the PIs for taking the time to come here and share your experiences and advice, any issues that you had, any positive experiences with the others. So I'm going to shut up now and let Christine take over.
Thank you so much, Praminda, for that really kind introduction, and I really appreciate it. We, I think, have had a really good experience with the Hanover partnership. And it's been a pleasure to work with the Dean's office on this. I think the support is phenomenal that they have been able to provide to our faculty in CAHSS, and especially social science faculty. So as Praminda said, the way the Hanover partnership works is that we have an application process to obtain tickets for you and other PIs who are on your team to be able to work with Hanover. So each team applies for a ticket. This past year, we offered 4 tickets with Hanover, plus Hanover held an on-campus grants training workshop. This coming year, because we aren't quite sure what will happen with the COVID-19 situation and what that will mean for the fall semester, we're going to skip the grants workshop, and instead we will have 5 tickets available for CAHSS faculty. So that's an increase of 1 ticket. So let me talk just a minute about what we're looking for in this application process. So these are sort of our considerations for best chance of selection. So for the best chance of being selected for a ticket, we need a couple things. We would need for you to have identified a specific RFP, or maybe 2 RFPs that you think you have a really strong sense that you would apply for. So we wouldn't, this wouldn't necessarily be required, but the reason it's important is because we need to know that you're at the stage of having a defined mechanism, and we also need to have a sense of timing of what proposals, if we granted a certain series of tickets, what proposals would be able to come in which order, because our package with Hanover requires that tickets be used consecutively, not concurrently. So we also have to do a bit of timing. So if you can tell us, this is my mechanism that I would be applying for, then we can sort of triage against all of the other applications and select the ones that would work well together on a timeline. It is also important that you give us your prospective RFP because the package that we have with Hanover does not include prospecting help. So this was a small source of confusion last year because, first year we're still trying to sort things out and there are a couple bumps in the road, but we have to have an assurance that you already know where you plan to submit, because otherwise, Hanover won't be able to help you that, and it's important that you hit the ground running with them when you work with them. So just to sum up, we need to know where you intend to apply. We need to be able to stagger our ticket usage. And we need to also be able to plan out our calendar, and ticket holders have to be assiduous at making sure they're going to keep to the timelines that they've given us so that everything runs smoothly. As Perminta stated earlier, our preference is for larger collaborative external proposals. So, not so much a single PI, more teams of faculty. Interdisciplinarity is preferred, if possible. Collaborative means more than one PI, but it can mean from folks outside of, CAHSS, but at least one of the PIs needs to be in CAHSS and tenured or tenure track faculty. So for instance, a research scientist could be on the proposal, but there needs to be a lead in CAHSS who's a tenured or tenure track faculty. Again, I think this is clear, but these tickets are meant to apply for external funding. This can mean federal agencies like NIH, NSF, and it can also be foundations, but all of our past years, PIs submitted to NIH and NSF. That's the general expectation, more or less, agencies of that type. And we also expect that, for the most part, Hanover PIs will work with MyPAR to submit their proposals. The MyPAR staff are extremely well equipped to handle large external awards, and they've been working with most of our ticket holders from this past year. So the way that it works is that we will issue a call for applicants. This will be a fairly easy Google form where you'll sort of tell us a bit about the planned research. You'll identify the RFP. You'll give us the deadline. You'll list who is on your team, who's the lead, and what department, and so forth. We will probably do a staggered call this year where we will, open up a competition for 2 or 3 tickets soon, and then 2 or 3 tickets maybe later. We'll announce that in the coming weeks. But that being said, if you already know that you're interested in applying for a ticket, go ahead and send me an email so I can just kind of gauge how much interest we have and for when. For instance, if you know you're not going to be applying for something until July 2021, that's different than if you already know that you're going to want to apply for something where the RFP would be for October 2020, let's say. So let me just go over, I have 6 short slides from Hanover, and I think it's helpful to kind of see how they present themselves and what information they provide to PIs. I'll go over these briefly, and then I'll turn it over to our current ticket holders so they can talk about their experiences. Okay, so this is just some background on Hanover. They provide grant development and strategic advising support. And this is just sort of a sense of return on investment for the proposals that they help with. Again, most of these are going to be proposals to federal agencies. Most of them are government agencies, the typical NSF, NIH, but also things like DOJ, DOD, and so forth, and foundations as well. So what you all are probably interested here, this is what Hanover offers and provides to the PIs. So they provide about a month's worth of review for a PI. That can either be all at once, it can be split up. That's sort of negotiated a little bit with the folks that are working with you from Hanover. But they give you insights into how to improve your proposal on everything from doing a close read to kind of saying, I'm not so sure you're actually answering this in terms of what they're asking for in the RFP, or, they're asking for objectives and you're giving aims, or they're asking for aims and you're giving objectives, and so forth. Or I'm not sure this conceptually lines up with what you said earlier in the proposal. So I'll let the PIs talk a little bit more about what sort of feedback they've gotten from the consultants and the process of that. But generally, there are a couple phone calls, there's written feedback, there's debrief conversations. So everybody wants to make sure that the PIs are getting really close support. Our primary contacts are Audrey and Andrew. Most of the PIs chat with Audrey so that she can get a sense of what your proposal is aiming to do, where you're aiming to submit, and then based on what your goals are, she will match you with one of Hanover's consultants, and they'll be the ones that are looking at your proposal and giving you feedback. And that is basically that's it for a really quick introduction to Hanover and what Hanover provides. I want to thank our PIs who are here, and I'll be turning things over to them to share their experiences and their tips. Just in terms of order, I'm going to turn things over first to Chris Swan in Department of Geography and Environmental Systems, then to Sarah Jewett in the Provost's office, and then Rebecca Schacht in the Department of Psychology.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm Chris Swan. I'm a professor in geography and environmental systems, and we have a huge grant going in to the National Science Foundation. It's a multi-institutional proposal for about 7.3 million, 7.2 million. And we engaged the Hanover group in two parts of the proposal. There was a competitive pre-proposal stage, and then if you pass muster, then there's the full proposal stage. And so the way Hanover worked with us was to have their two reviews done, one for the pre-proposal and one for the full proposal, which I think it deviates a little bit from what their general MO is. The pre-proposal review went really well. They looked at it very closely. I think they took about 2 weeks. We were quite happy. They gave us a nice debrief. If I had recommendations for anyone, it would be, and this would be if you had sent it out for friendly review too, would be to have specific questions that you would like to have addressed, and they will address them. Things like, are our figures coherent? Do you like our color schemes? Stuff as simple as that to more substantive comments about whether or not, say, your conceptual framework matches up with your theoretical section, and so on. This is something that we didn't take advantage of as much in the first review of our pre-proposal, but it's something that we're meeting. It turns out our full proposal is due to them next Friday. We meet every Thursday. The writing team meets every Thursday morning. Next week, we're going to discuss what it is that we're going to have them address, in addition to what they think is important. They really dive into it and take a look. They may not be an expert in your field, but they, I don't know how to describe it. It's like they're experts in proposals, but not necessarily the content. And in doing so, they provide you with some feedback that you may not expect, due to which could be helpful when it comes to the writing style, the wordsmithing, and so on. I think that's all I have to offer.
Great. Sarah?
Hi. I submitted along with the PI. I'm a co-PI on the STEM grant that we submitted to NSF about a month ago, and also in GES. Matt Baker is the lead PI, and Chris Hahn and I are co-PIs on the grant. And like Chris and his team, we had a very positive experience with the team at Hanover. I think what we found to be really helpful with them is that they are they're very collaborative. So they're very interested in what kind of process is going to help you the most. So when we set it up, we had an initial review because we were at the sort of the beginning of the process in terms of writing the proposal. So we did our first pass and then checked in with them so they could give us feedback about which areas to really focus on and which areas we could really dig deeper into. And then we also had them review it when we had a really good sort of solid proposal, so that they could check and make sure, are we lining up with all the eligibility requirements? Are we, are outcomes the way they need to be? Do we have enough data in order to support our claims? one of the things that I found really helpful in terms of one of the questions that we asked, and I would really recommend that other people ask this question. In our second round, we said, what to you, and again, they're not in the field, so they're looking at it from outside of the field. What to you seems like the most innovative part of this proposal that we can really lift up and make more visible? And they really helped say, from our perspective on our read, this is what really stands out. And then Matt and Chris and I were able to go back and say, okay, we need to hit this a little bit harder and really raise it up because this is what we want to showcase. So we felt that was a really helpful question. The other question that we asked that we felt like was really helpful, again, is there anything where we're not lining up with eligibility requirements? For example, we were working, though the grant proposal doesn't fund an external partner, it's based on our collaborative partnership with Howard Community College, and they were also submitting an STEM grant. And so we had to be very careful that we managed the grant so that we didn't interfere with each other's eligibility. And he was really helpful in providing feedback to say, this is what you need to check with an NSF officer about, this is fine. So we felt like that was really helpful. Again, I think their flexibility, their ability to be collaborative, their ability to answer the questions that are important to the team, I think were all terrific. And they seemed to just have a really good sense of what needed to be there and how it needed to be written. Again, to Chris's point, I think they're really helpful on making sure you're not using jargon, to make sure that you're stating it in ways that someone from any field could read. And I think that really helped us to stay focused on the task at hand. So we, like their team, had a very positive experience.
Great. Rebecca.
Hi. I had to reboot because everything was frozen. So hopefully everything's fine now. So I'm working with a colleague in psychology. I'm Rebecca Saxe. I'm an assistant professor, clinical psychologist in psychology. And I'm submitting an R01 to NIH with my collaborator in psychology, who's a neuroscientist, Remy Kitan. And let's see. So our experience has been really positive. It's been really helpful to have their feedback. And so at the beginning of our collaboration, they were really helpful in answering some questions about, they didn't help us figure out where to submit, but they did help us figure out things like, should we do an R01 versus an R21 and that kind of stuff. So that was really helpful. And then we actually wrote a full draft of our proposal over spring break while the whole shutdown was going on. So I was very glad that we had this pretty intense contingency, because I think it would have been pretty hard to pull off a full draft, in the midst of the shutdown, the beginning of the shutdown. So we submitted our initial full draft to them on March 23rd. And they turned it around a couple weeks later, and their feedback was really, really helpful. So one of the things so there's a few things that they did that was really great. So one is just organizationally coming up with ideas to improve readability. So of course we know that reviewers are in a huge hurry, and if your grant is annoying to figure out, they're just going to not figure it out. I've heard many, many stories of PIs getting their reviews back and just, it's really clear that their reviewers just didn't even understand really critical pieces of their project. And so I really want to avoid that in our proposal. So just helping us map it onto sort of more typical or traditional structural, organizational ways to structure the grant. Also helpful was having an outside person to identify gaps in our logic and our thinking. So questions like, I don't understand your recruitment strategy. How are you going to do this? I don't understand, there's some pieces of the literature that could be highlighted here. And also, you can really highlight more the fact that you're doing a lot of these procedures already in your pilot study. So making sure that that's really clear to the reviewers, because of course that's a huge strength. And then another, I think, really strategic, helpful input was, helping us think through, should we have senior investigators on there? We're both pre-tenure, and so should we have a senior investigator on there? Does it undermine us as, developing autonomously as PIs ourselves? Thinking about what their role would be and how to describe that. And so that was really helpful as well, because, these are kind of like, we don't know. And it's easy to see logic for a number of different angles. So it was really helpful to have an outside person who wasn't us and totally, melded with our thinking to identify some of this really important stuff. So I think that was all really helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit about what your experience was. At this point, I think we can just open it up. I'm going to follow what I've seen to work pretty well so far with this, which is if you have a question, just type next in the chat, and then I'll just, keep track of who's next, and we can go from there. So if anybody wants to kick us off, feel free to ask a question.
Everyone, this is very interesting. Thanks for scheduling this, and the folks who have had experience for speaking about it. So how far ahead of the deadlines are you getting things to them, and how has that affected your sort of planning process? And a lot of people are hitting things relatively late and having trouble making the routing deadlines even. So I'm wondering how much farther this has to set you back and how you figure that out.
So this is Chris. We wanted to give ourselves at least a week or two before it had to go to sponsored programs to absorb their comments and be able to put them into the proposal. Now this was a pre-proposal, so this was only like 7 pages. This time we're having it done 2 months in advance. Well, they get it 3 months in advance, and they're taking a month to look at it. And so we're having them start. So we're really pushing hard to get a copy of a clean proposal done 3 months in advance of the deadline. So yeah, it really throws a wrench into what you're probably used to in terms of scheduling, because you've got that sort of that time in between that not only are they looking at it, but also you're responding to their comments to try to polish your proposal.
For us, I think it's been actually really helpful to have. We started in the fall. I should say also we're submitting for the June 5th deadline, and we started in the fall. So that I think worked really well for us. That we had all this time to pull it together. And in our first meeting with Hanover, we mapped out deadlines and this draft, and then they'll turn it around to this. We'll get it after 2 weeks, and then we'll submit it again. So we'll get our second draft back from them on Monday, so May 18th, and then we have to have it to OSP, I think, by the 29th. So we're prepared to do this really fast turnaround, but what Audrey told us is, it'll basically be pretty much ready to go when she gets it back to us. So it'll be in really good shape. So we'll have to see. So that part worked well for us. But again, we had the whole academic year, almost, not all of it, but to work through all of that. Forced us to write earlier drafts in a way that honestly we just probably would not have to.
Sarah, you
I wish I
around
could do this for myself.
Yeah.
Make myself do this without this external. That's like one of the critical pieces that I'm like, how can I bottle this? Because it's actually really nice that I've been writing the other pieces while they're reviewing the second grant. And so a lot of it's done, and I would love to be able to make myself do this without someone else having to do it for me.
COET also has a partnership with Hanover, and in talking to them, we also heard some feedback that one of the most helpful things is having somebody to hold you accountable to early deadlines, and that helps a lot. I was going to ask if Sarah wanted to chime in, because you all were on a slightly tighter timeline. Did you have anything else you wanted to share about timeline for working with the consultants?
Yeah, ours was unique in the fact that it was going to be due right when everybody shut down. So everybody shut down, including sort of Hanover. And so our deadline was very different than we had originally envisioned. But But I would say, similar to everybody else, we had a sense of what we wanted to do in the fall, and we had written some sort of summaries of the project that we wanted to do before we worked with Hanover, and we were able to use that concept paper or pre-proposal from another project to get us started. But we also got their last set of feedback very close to time, probably within. See, I've repressed all that now. Probably within, I'm sure it was within a week of when we had to submit. But the nice thing is between the first set of feedback and the second, we were also able to ask questions over email. And that helped us a lot. So even between the drafts, we were able to say, so we were thinking about this, and here's the three ways we were thinking about this. What would you suggest? So that he was able, and we were able to then keep moving on, working on a section instead of getting stalled between the two big reviews. So I would say getting it back really helped us focus that last week on, are there any glaring errors or anything we really need to lift up even higher? And we felt like it worked all right. Like everyone would always want to have more time, but realistically, even though you think you've done as much as you can to be prepared, there's always a lot to do during that time. But because it was tighter, we were all right. I mean, it worked out.
Great. Yeah, Nancy, would you like to add?
I'm sort of hiding on this webinar, but I'm an assistant professor in social work, and I work with Brandy Wallace in sociology. And we were the first ticket. So between the time, and we submitted to NIH in February. So between the time we found out we got the ticket and the time we had to turn it around was pretty short. But given that it kept us on track, it kept us moving, and they were able to do things like look at our specific aims while we were working on the rest of it. And then we could use the feedback we got on the specific aims to strengthen parts of the proposal while they were doing their larger review. So we were able to break up the reviews a little bit, which, like I said, gave us time to use some of the feedback in other areas while they were doing other things. And yes, we got the final feedback within a day or two of when it was due to sponsored programs, but by that point we had gotten so much feedback from them that we were in pretty good shape, and those last couple of days were really just tweaking and making sure things matched all the way through and those kinds of things.
Thank you. Anybody else with any other questions? Okay, Tasneem says, hello, I'm wondering if working with Hanover would be feasible for R21 level funding in collaboration with UM. Does anybody want to speak to that? Rebecca or Nancy, probably, I think.
We submitted an R21 through Hanover, and it was, it's not $7.3 million or whatever Christopher said. It's about $400,000, but it was appropriate and it worked.
Yeah, I would say it would have worked just as well for an R21. I think one of the things that when we talked about early in our collaboration with them was how a lot of this is sort of really helping us with our grants personship too, right? So it really I think that a lot of this is going to really generalize to other projects. So the size of the project, the scope of the project was really less important than just how are you putting together the logic and, the rationale and making it sound exciting and making sure that the methods are fairly sound, because the consultants they're not experts, they're not academics. I actually don't know exactly what the reviewer's background is. But I also think that grant reviewers themselves may or may not, they have varying levels of knowledge of the literature that you're going to be referencing. And so it's actually important that somebody who isn't hugely familiar with the literature is reading it and giving feedback. So I don't think the size or scope of the grant would really matter that much. Great.
So I'm going to also speak a little bit to the second part of that question, which is, I'm wondering about the timeline for the call of applications or tickets for the fall if we're considering an October 2020 deadline. So I think, we're still sort of hashing this out, but it might be something like a June or July call. And so I think that would, we would, the Google form to fill out is very short. And I think we would be able to make our determinations pretty quickly whether, we give 2 or 3 tickets this go round. And so I don't see why an October 2020 deadline wouldn't work. I would just say if that's what you're thinking, and if you plan to submit it anyway, whether or not you get a Hanover ticket, maybe go ahead and start, preparing some of that just in case. But Chris's pre-proposal went in August, and we had just started working with Hanover like a month before. The partnership that we have with Hanover is going to be seamless, from this year to next year. So, there'll be, real continuity between this year and next year. It's not like there's a waiting period. So I think that would be fine. I'm also going to go back up. Carissa had asked earlier, do all faculty on the actual grant have to be at UMBC? And the answer to that is no. There should be at least one CAHSS tenured or tenure track faculty member on the team. But going from there, you're welcome to build your team as you see fit. And I wondered if maybe Chris wants to speak to that, since you had quite a few PIs on your proposal and your actual proposal from all over the country and elsewhere too, right?
Yeah, on the front page, there's only one of us. I'm the only one from UMBC, but I'm the lead. What was interesting, and I was surprised at, was that when it came to the debriefing call, there were other folks from outside the institution that wanted to be on the call too. So it turned out to be, I think, some of them were more interested than anything in how a consultant can work with you on a proposal. But it worked out fine, and we had participation by folks from other institutions.
And how many total PIs did you have, Chris? How many total members of your team?
So we have 5 on the front page, and then 30 some senior personnel. That they were not involved though. Now, our writing team is 12. We have 12 on the writing team. My intention is to invite all 12 of them to our debriefing call after the review of the full proposal. We'll see. That'll be, we just scheduled June 30th. We'll see how many can make it. I suspect a handful will, and they'll come with questions. We will have had a week of review of their recommendations prior to that call. But they'll set up, Hanover will set up a conference call with us. I wanted to comment on or add some information to Rebecca's, I think it was Rebecca that was speaking to the background of the reviewers. Some of them I know were like, they worked at NSF. So they know what the review process is like. Some of them have background in our area of expertise generally. And so Hanover will try to put the proposal in the hands of someone that's as closely aligned as possible with what you're doing, but there's no guarantee that it's going to be. I'm just trying to provide some information that I had on this. There's no guarantee that you're going to get it to someone that is directly, as she said, directly aligned with your work. But I think they know the grant writing process pretty well, and have worked at granting agencies before. If that helps.
Great. Yeah, Perminda.
Yeah, so just wanted to add to that, and what Audrey indicated to us was that the timeliness of getting yourself in a queue with them is important, so that if they can get to see your proposal, then they have a whole series of consultants who they can select, and so they will be able to select the one that they think would work best for your grant if they have time, because those consultants are also booked with certain grants that they may be working on, and so Hanover needs to be able to see if they are free, and if that ideal person is not free, they may choose somebody else. But so that's why it's important also, this whole sort of the management of the calendar that Christine will need to do with all the different proposals that come in, and who goes when and what your deadline is, but also what who the consultants that Hanover will be able to provide to look at your proposal. I also wanted to ask the group if those of you who attended the grants workshop that we had in last September, October, what do you think about the pattern of maybe just having a grants workshop every other year instead of every year? How important would it be for, to encourage more and more people putting in proposals for getting Hanover tickets, etc.? How useful is that? I mean, we got only the same amount of money from the dean's office, so we had to, we can't always get 5 tickets. We got the 5 tickets because we gave up the grants workshop this year, which worked out fine anyway, because who knows what's going to happen in the fall. But if we did that every other year, the grants workshop, what do you all think about that?
I can just start. For me, I think in our team, it was really important because it sort of generated some excitement and inspiration for the process. And it also connected us with lots of other folks who were thinking about research questions. So there's that sense of community research spirit that I think was kind of nice for us. And it also sort of introduced us to the idea of research consultancy. I mean, having said that, I think it's important at a minimum to have it every other year, recognizing that it's probably more important to have an additional ticket than it is to have that workshop session. But I think for us and our team, it was really helpful. That initial session was really helpful and really sort of galvanized our interest and willingness and wish to do it.
That's really good to know. Anyone else have any questions for our panelists or any of us? All right. Well, seeing none. Oh, yeah,
Christine, I was just thinking, since Carolyn Flowers is with us, I was just wondering whether Carolyn had any, pointers about the proposals that came through MyPar, whether there was a difference when people were working with Hanover versus, otherwise, any thoughts you had about this from the perspective of, MyPar and people who are handling the whole management of proposals, pre and post award, etc.
Yeah, great. Carolyn or Elle from MyPar, yeah.
Can you hear me? So yes, I think the key timing is everything. The sooner we get the information and the announcement, and then we can start reading and getting everything ready for you. We'll give you a timeline on when we need documents and what needs to be uploaded and when. So I think I would just say the sooner we can get started, the better. The better job we can do for you, the more time you give us to do it. That's the key.
Exactly. Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions, comments? I'm going to put also, I put a link to the MyPar website, but I will also put a link to the FAQs for how to get started working with MyPar in case anybody wants to see that. Although I think most of the folks on here are familiar or in psychology. So great. So thank you all so much for coming. So I would say feel free to reach out to Parminder or I at any point if you have any other questions. If you already know that you have an RFP and you plan to submit or you plan to apply for a Hanover ticket, go ahead and let me know so that we can kind of triage what might be coming down the pike. And otherwise, we look forward to working with you. Thank you all so much. And thanks so much to our PIs for joining us.